Are you a pretender or a proclaimer? Do you live on borrowed faith, or do you faithfully give the gospel? Those are the questions we're going to look at today. Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Marquez, and this is the Baptist on the Bible podcast. Here is your 7 at 7 devotion, a devotion designed to encourage you at the beginning and end of your work week on Mondays and Fridays. Today we're continuing our series called The End of an Empire from Daniel chapter 5. It's going to be an exciting one today as we look at Daniel and Belshazzar and their first confrontation here. And so there's a lot of verses to cover today, so we're going to go ahead and jump into these verses right away and then have some time to discuss it. So beginning at verse 13 of Daniel chapter 5, it says, Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of you that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing of the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. He was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. What a fantastic passage here. We see a confrontation, and this confrontation we might be able to read between the lines a little bit. It's not always clear, but that's what's fun about narrative, is just trying to get into the scene and try to understand exactly what's going on. We're seeing a certain desperation with Belshazzar here. Upon the queen's advice, he calls in Daniel, and he pretends not really to know much about Daniel, but he does want to make sure that Daniel recognizes the status going on here. He recognizes Daniel as a conquered slave from Judah, who was conquered by the king of Babylon, the father of Belshazzar. So there's some sizing up going on. He then kind of elevates Daniel a little bit, but it's really a pragmatic motivation, right? He's going to offer Daniel gifts. You know, you can have rule, you can have rank, you can have royalty if you can do this for me. But it's not as though he went to Daniel first. And so there's a certain recognition here that Belshazzar might be playing dumb a little bit. And in so doing, he really didn't want to call Daniel, but he's kind of forced. There's a reality sometimes in the world today that when the world finally reaches the end of its rope, maybe it will be willing to look to the church for help, to the gospel for help, purely from a pragmatic perspective. It's not because there is a change of heart or a desire to bow knee before God, but rather we just need the right steps to take in order to correct a mistake that was made. I think sometimes Christians fall into this, where we don't really approach God in a way that is genuine, seeking salvation, seeking blessing, but rather we're looking for the 5 right things to do in order to get what we want. And it's a pragmatic approach to the gospel, and Daniel has none of it. Right? It's very similar to when Ahab calls Jehoshaphat and he's trying to get him to go to war. And Jehoshaphat says, Do you not have a prophet of the Lord here, of Yahweh, that we may inquire of him? Because Ahab had gotten all of his yes men in. And Jehoshaphat says, Where's your prophet of the Lord? And so Micaiah is called in. And Ahab introduces him as the one that we may inquire of the Lord through, but I hate him because he does not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. And so he doesn't want to go before the Lord because he knows that it never works out in his best interests. The world may sometimes go its own direction, and we need to be careful as Christians that when they finally are ready to call upon the church for help, look to the gospel for help, that we aren't just being used for pretense. Rather, we need to be bold and proclaim like Daniel. Daniel dismissed the gifts of Belshazzar. He says, keep them for yourselves, give them to another, but I will tell you what this means. And so the gifts are meaningless to him. He's 80. What is he going to do with all of these gifts? He's actually been there and done that already. Rather, he takes Belshazzar down memory lane. He reminds him of the time that his probably grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest king that ever lived, did anything he wanted. People lived or died by his voice. And this great man whom Daniel served was so wonderful and so magnificent that he even elevated himself to the level of God. And it was at that point that God broke Nebuchadnezzar of his pride. And because Nebuchadnezzar finally confessed the reign of the Most High God, he was forgiven. That's really what I see in this, that he was restored because he recognized that God is in charge. But Belshazzar, look at how it ends. You, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. Are we prepared to be bold like Daniel, to call people to repentance even when we're being sized up, even when we are being reminded that our lives could be taken for the faithfulness to the gospel? Are we bold like Daniel to claim, wherever he leads, I'll go and I will be faithful to the message? That's what God is calling us to do. And whatever happens, we need to remember that God is in control and we need to humble ourselves before him. I hope that you'll do that today. God bless and take care.